you're definitely not lurkers. And as we talked about this community, I talk about a lot as community of engagement and practice. So it's not just about pushing content out at people. Big part of it, things are moving and things are changing so fast. We have to do more for curation and sense making of what's happening. So I'll pick on my friend Tim Stour over there. Again, Tim, you're wondering why you showed up in this session. Not with the mic yet. But basically that aspect of we need to take from people like Tim, who heads up ALM, do curation and sense making for you folks of what's there and what's coming, so you can be, I'll term it, some of the force multipliers in your organization. We also have to get you good stories so you can be storytellers inside your organizations as well. The other key aspect is curriculum, learning paths and education to help you evolve. You know, one thing I've noticed since companies, I'm not sure if it's true in South Africa, companies used to invest more on training. Would you say, who in your organization say that they invest more on training than they did 10 years ago? Anybody? It's less or hardly at all. So we have to leverage the community to get you learning programs and education to evolve. And there's need to upskill and reskill workers of every age as well. So that's another part of the community. The other thing is coaching, helping with that mentoring of others, and also reverse mentoring between the different generations as well. Connection, why they're here today, to facilitate the connections together and to enable the conversations that'll happen. You know, I love the old phrase that all of us all of us, if I remember correctly, are smarter than one of us. And we're all going through similar things, you know, just at different points in time. Crowdsourcing, to be able to, you know, it's interesting, crowdsourcing has been around for a while, but rarely from a community side do we crowdsource, I think, enough to look for answers to our questions, right? It's kind of silly. And the other piece where ultimate is collaboration, to truly collaborate together to rapidly evolve not just SAP solutions, but non-SAP solutions in the ecosystem as well. And I will tag on this as well, one thing I didn't include, what's changed greatly since the 90s and the early 2000s is the SAP ecosystem as well. You as architects as well have to not just understand SAP, but understand who the key partners in the ecosystem are, I would say more than you have ever had. With the whole push to more partner development on BTP and so on and so forth, right? And this was announced at Sapphire Orlando. SAP has revamped their certifications. And the first role-based certification out of the gate is for enterprise architects. So SAP has realized the importance of the role, hence addressing the enterprise architects first in this. And this is from a US market role. I'm not sure how it ties to the South American market, but enterprise architect is ranked as the #1 role in the US in 2022 and a high in demand to drive digital transformation. So good news if you're an architect, and I think if it's not there in your market now, it will soon to be evolve that. There's some basics and fundamentals. You folks will get the slide deck, so I'm not going to go through this. Still some knowledge of things like TOGAF sort of blend in the equation as well. And we're also talking with the folks with TOGAF as well. What are the changes with TOGAF 10, education of architects. So we're doing some collaboration with the folks of TOGAF as well and our overall community. I'm not going to go through the personas, but this is example of these core exam topics that are covered. Frameworks and tool sets, architect's vision, business architecture, we touched on that earlier, data and application architecture, technology architecture, and architecture roadmap. So what we're going to be doing on the community through the platform as well is going deep on these different topics in our enterprise architecture group and actually collaborate with the different user groups on how they can go deeper on these subjects as well, not just digitally, but from a face-to-face perspective as well. You know, what we're blending in some of the events in North America is having, for example, a one-day pre-conference session that goes deep on a one-day iteration of this to help raise people's knowledge as well. So after that preamble setup, let me talk to you a bit about some of the top 10 things from an enterprise architect's perspective. So what do you do? And I'm a bit lazy, and every session has to have something where they ask ChatGPT, right? It's got to be in every session. That seems to be like a law in North America when you get presidents now. Someone inside the session has to mention ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT, what are the top 10 things enterprise architects need to know and do? Drum roll. Here's the list of the top 10 that ChatGPT says. It's that kind of interesting. I'm not sure if you heard the stories that ChatGPT has even been known to lie about different things. That's come out in the news quite a bit. I validated these, so ChatGPT is not really lying about any of these. Cloud first strategy, that's becoming big across the board. Innovation, user experience, emerging technologies. So you see this top 10 list, and it does seem pretty reasonable. So what I did as well, this is, if you go to the SAP community page and under groups, this is where basically our home for our enterprise architecture community. It's a global enterprise architecture community. So I floated this out to our community, asked the question in terms of what are in their top 10 of things to know and do. Plus, throughout my 16 different roadshows, 16 different cities across North America, spent time talking to people like you to get a sense of what's on their minds. And what our intent to do in this top 10 list that will be drilling down deeper as an overall community is basically go on topics and subtopics to have both content and discussion. I'll use my term curation and sense making again for you folks, and almost create a guidebook for SAP enterprise architects. I'll term more enterprise architects and SAP centric organizations, because all of you don't have just SAP inside your companies, that's for sure. So here are the top 10, and I can see it better if I'm standing on this side. So number one on the list, everyone's topic is AI and automation. So we're going to help you make sense of, in terms of this whole topic, and especially from an SAP side as well, to know where it's embedded. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are on S4? And I would assume the rest of you aren't, correct? And you know, it's interesting, what we found across these different cities as well, asking the question of people in the room, you get the people that have moved to S4 that have not activated, done a lift and shift in many cases, have not activated some of the capabilities that are already built in, and some are just because the SI they worked with did not know a lot of things they were there, or given when they implemented, they weren't available. And the other piece for those of you that are moving to S4 as well, some of these SIs just don't know enough about it to know that you need to build that in your implementation. So we'll have a whole stream around that. The other big piece, you know, no surprise with enterprise architects, around strategy, roadmaps, methods, and tools. So talking not just SAP tools and more, I'll term almost moving more prescriptive of the key tools that are there that you should be using. I'll also do a highlight for solution, something called Solution Scout. Have any of you heard of Solution Scout? It was just announced at Sapphire. There's a session on it here tomorrow. Tim, what time is Philip giving a session tomorrow? Is it 2 p.m.?
I will look it up.
So you are the first group to learn about Solution Scout anywhere in the world, actually. So Phil Mayer is giving a session tomorrow talking about Solution Scout. So it's an easy way of enabling you to find solutions in SAP. So very worthwhile session to attend. And also the other thing we're talking about that's moved in the fold is something called LeanIX. It's an enterprise architecture tool that is actually an endorsed solution by SAP. That has a strong connection with also SAP Signavio as well. Did you find it, Tim?
Yes, it's at 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock?
It's the first session in the stream.
Okay, 11 o'clock, first session in the stream is one on Solution Scout. So I'm very keen on knowing about that as well. Third item on this list is continuous improvement and process transformation. So that has a number of different things of it, including things like Signavio and things like that embedded in. But something else you'll learn more about tomorrow in another session is around Tim, are you still calling it Business Transformation Suite?
That's what we have it called in
Okay.
England.
So, Business Transformation Suite, I kind of don't like the name, but I think it's more continuous improvement. But Tim, could you just quickly articulate what's it all about? And this is your few minutes of fame to call it your session tomorrow. And
No, we believe
use the mic.
yeah, but that mic, did you turn it off?
I didn't turn it on.
Okay. Technician Paul, thank you very much.
He does great software, but
What we think is really important is that we enable our customers to go on a journey, on an end-to-end transformation, not only from a lift and shift perspective, but also to leverage the latest capabilities that are delivered either inside SAP S4 or as one of the surrounding cloud solutions. And therefore, we are in the process, I should say, of defining an end-to-end methodology that describes step by step how this is done, and also deliver an end-to-end tool chain that enables you to also go into execution. And this tool chain comprises SAP Signavio certainly as the cornerstone of transformation and of process detection, and also deriving what processes make sense for your company, but also certainly spends all the way into realization, now coming to my home turf, to the ALM topics with SAP Cloud ALM, enabling you to adopt innovation faster and at scale, and to do a continuous adoption rather than doing one big bang and then never looking back, but to be really on top of things the entire time. And that is complemented then also with complete integration into automatic testing with Tricentis being included in enterprise support. So from the modeling and the detection of processes all the way into realization, this is what I will be talking about tomorrow in the solutions stream as the very last session. Before then, Vasilios Lolas will give us the deep dive on Signavio. Thanks, Paul.
great. You can pay me later, but in US dollars instead of Canadian because they're worth much
I
more.
still have rent left.
Okay. So the fourth topic there is business architecture. That sort of came out loud and clear in the interest. So we're going to talk about, what business architecture is, building a business architecture practice. So I'm working with Wendy Keene, who wrote that book, Strategy to Reality, that I mentioned as well. And SAP has a lot of business architects as well that we're going to be further engaging on this topic. The fifth item on the list, I was at a LeanIX session actually. I did a session with about 100 enterprise architects in the room at a LeanIX event. It was an SAP session for companies running SAP in Frankfurt. And I asked them, what is the one thing we could most do as a community to help enterprise architects? And number one answer was, give us a forum where enterprise architects can talk about the move to S4. So that was a very high demand. So from planning, implementing, and using the term thrive after go live, it'd be a forum for enterprise architects to talk about moving to S4. And also the other element we'll be talking about is the engagement of enterprise architects through an S4 transformation as well in that mix. The sixth on the list is framing as Enterprise Architect's Guide to Business Technology Platform. So I know how they put it. You've heard of SAP Cloud Platform and various things on the Business Technology Platform. We're doing, how do I say it? Framing Business Technology Platform if you're an SAP-centric customer, what it means to you and what you should be doing versus BTP is wonderful, it has all this amazing tools, so on and so forth. So look for more on that. And also talking as well of what is clean core. You probably heard the term clean core, right? How many of you know what clean core truly means? Oh, you think? What do you think it means? Oh, Mike, this is audience participation part. I didn't tell you about that part.
Yes, I think it's just keeping SAP as standard as it is, the best business processes and everything, and not customizing it. And the BTP has been provided for you to do that. Your custom and everything that is not standard, you'll build in BTP. then integrating back into S/4HANA private cloud. Otherwise, public cloud, that's clean.
And you volunteered, you win a book. Tim, how did she do?
You're hired.
We have an open session tomorrow for that, if you're interested on that. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are either on private cloud or think you'll move to private cloud? How many of you think you'll be going to public cloud? You're already in public cloud? Cool. The seventh one is leveraging enterprise architecture to enable sustainability. And I think the sustainability topic is a lot more, I've got the detection, it's big here, but probably gets much more press in Europe, not as much in the US, unfortunately, but it gets a fair bit in Canada as well. But my view on that is, so we're going to be talking about whenever, sustainability should just be embedded in S4. So we have a lot of interest from our architects about continuing the conversation around this whole topic of sustainability. The eighth one on the list, women in enterprise architecture, the interest in bringing, I'll term it more diversity overall in the field, but bringing more women in the field and actually many different generations. And I think what we're seeing is the opportunity is there since you don't have to know quite as much with cloud, a lot of the technical things anymore. That's key. And the ninth thing on the list is mindset and skills as well. So the mindsets for an enterprise architect as well as the skills, not just the technical, but the soft skills as well. Things like emotional intelligence, things like storytelling. There are a number of soft skills that are extremely important, and actually probably important also in this age of AI too, and I'm sure you've all heard a lot about that. And the last one on the list is the changing role of the enterprise architect. With the move to, everything is changing in our world. So it's not beyond expectation that the role of the enterprise architect is going to change. So we're looking at the change of the role. We're engaged with a gentleman named Andrew Binns who wrote a book called Corporate Explorers, How Corporations Can Beat Startups at the Innovation Game. He's got a book coming out in August called A Field Guide for Corporate Explorers. So architects more as innovators on there. How can architects be sort of more strategic in their organizations as well? And I think a big part of this as well is going back to the curation and sense making, how you can, in essence, get information, the right information, to help your business as well. So those are the 10 that we're sort of expanding on and working through that we're going to communicate out. You know, these are just background. We have I'm not going to go through all these, but there are a number of additional topic streams that have been identified that we'll be working on. And I'll just add one that's not on this list. Have many of you heard the topic of FinOps? So I'm not sure what it's here. I was actually at a Software One did a good event. I attended an analyst event with them back in April. They do a lot of work with FinOps and a lot of helping companies making sure they're managing their cloud investments well. So I learned more about FinOps, and there's a whole FinOps.org in place. So you should check out FinOps.org. One thing I've learned about FinOps, and the stat I think IDC and others are throwing around, is about 30% of cloud spend in an organization, that's waste in terms of. And, horror stories in terms of people, it's like leaving your power on. I was going to use a power on your house for analogy, but it's probably not a good thing to use in South Africa. But the whole aspect in terms of leaving things running and then getting a $100,000 bill at the end of the month that you're unaware of. So many organizations are embedding FinOps into their IT organizations, and it's another awareness from an architect side. And I think I was talking with a gentleman actually a couple days ago was talking about ArcOps, more tie-in between architecture and operations as well. Almost the analogy is almost like a digital twin perspective from your architecture state as well. So a few different topics that we'll be sort of working on and evolving from the community. and I teased that out earlier, so it'll be communicated out to this entire audience here that this meeting is happening, and we'll see if we can get a broadcast going on it as well, to be the start of an AFSUG. I get confused with that because I dealt with ASUG for like 30 years, AFSUG, ASUG, for an enterprise architecture community. And one thing about communities as well, and I did it as a customer, you know, communities are always looking for passionate volunteers who want to contribute. And I always say to people, you know, you should volunteer because it's a way, I'm kind of lazy, it's kind of your way of getting others to do a lot of work for you, so to speak, but to expand the size of your practice in an organization and get input from so many others. And the other thing I didn't touch on as well, just out of curiosity, how many of you feel you have a fairly mature enterprise architecture practice? Come on, nobody? Two brave souls at the back. Thank you. Kind of moderate? How about kind of, and we're not taking names, kind of lacking or very immature? So what we're talking about, we've had a lot of input as well, I go back from this, of how can we help people evolve their enterprise, not just skills, but their practice as well. And one thing that we've been talking about is when you're doing an S4 implementation, some of the foundational things you need to set up to basically thrive after go live and drive forward adoption and continuous improvement is elements of what would be in an enterprise at practice anyways. So if you had some of those guidelines going in, that work you're going to do anyways in context of this S4 implementation on there will help further build a practice. I think that'd be a pretty good thing. You know, there's a saying, maybe a North American thing, if you don't have a destination, any road will do. Well, if you have a bit of a destination, you know a bit of path to get there, right? You're kind of building the foundations as you're growing. And that QR code takes us to the site, and you'll get this. And you know, don't hesitate to sort of connect at any time. We have, I think we have 6 minutes for questions. Tim took all my time, I apologize, with his commercial on his session tomorrow.
Guilty as charged.
Any questions?
Sorry, it's maybe a bit of a left-sided question, but it sounds like you've got a hell of a lot of exposure to companies over the world and so forth. What is your feeling about migrating to S4? Would you say it's mostly medium-sized companies that have done it already, and the large enterprises are still sitting in the wings waiting, or?
Well, it's really across the board. I mean, you have some major companies that have already gone live, and you have some companies like Chevron and Shell that are in motion right now. They're pretty massive corporations. And you know, they all take different approaches, right? Depending upon their circumstance. Bluefield, greenfield, brownfield. If you haven't started your journey yet, a good friend of mine, and I've got a full deck on his presentation on charting your path to S4, that gives some good prescriptive guidance on what you should do. It's part of like a 3-hour pre-conference he did in depth and detail. You know, S4 has been around since 2015. A lot has changed since 2015 in many different ways, including the tools and things that are available to you, as well as the tools as well to help you in the whole data migration side.
And then maybe just another one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, everyone else has jumped their hands up, so I'll give you another minute or two.
So, look, this is the SAP conference, so the undertone will always be SAP. But from a skills point of view, from an architect, my feeling is that we need, as architects, to broaden our minds, not just SAP, because there are so many other services out there.
Yep.
Would you agree that we need to, when it comes to skills, look further than SAP, skilling up in that area, and rather look at the broader world out there? Because there are many companies coming out, smaller ones, bringing up a new service that SAP does not have yet for the next 2 years or so. So yeah, I'd just like to hear your comment on that.
So, going back to some of the roadmap stuff, you have to understand where SAP is today, what's coming next, what's also in their partner ecosystem, right? To your point, some may be ones that are an ecosystem partner they're an easy plug-in, and to your point, some of them may fill a business need that you have to plug in. But if you're not aware, and your job is to aware, one, you may jump on something where it makes perfect sense to do. You don't want to jump on something saying, hey, it's going to be rolled out in 6 months, right? Or should I compare that to another partner in the ecosystem that's already there, right? Tied in.
Thanks very much for traveling. Must be tough, so thanks for coming. How do we prevent, so number one, that you're an independent person, I think is fantastic, and the initiative is amazing. But how do we prevent a community like this going down the value engineering route, where it's seen as like an SAP sale Signavio?
Value engineering?
I'm just asking.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously you're thinking quite deeply about how to manage the community. So I'd just be interested to hear your perspectives there.
Well, it is really quite a balance. But if you always, SAP will do what they do on the value engineering other extremes because they're in the business to sell, right? And they come up with some pretty slick business cases, so on and so forth, to do that, right? To drive these higher transformations. But where you do right for the customer, if you continue to listen, you continue to add value, right? And I treat it like a trusted partner mindset. A trusted partner will tell you something if it's not necessarily good for them, right? But it's a balancing act because on the one hand, you want them to evolve, right? So you get a bit of both, I'll say it, the more marketing stuff, the more value engineering pushes, blah, blah, blah. All the SAP guys, Tim just left, so I can talk like that. And the other practical, I was a utility customer, we had power plants, right? Our big thing was basically to sweat the assets, keep them running, and keep it evolving. And your decision to move in, you may want to, right for you may be to delay S4 and just do those incremental improvements, squeeze the value until the time is right. But when the time is right and you do move, you want to make sure, I had a good buddy of mine, Michael Doan, who wrote the SAP Green Book, Thrive After Go Live years ago, who talked about, SAP is, it's like a marriage. Your go live is like a marriage, right? You do all this work, you have the wedding day and you're married. But the real work is afterwards, right? And making sure the adoption happen, you continue to grow and add value. A quickie divorce is not easy in SAP land, as you folks sort of know. Does that?
It's just tough, because Signavio is a fantastic tool,
Yep.
but it's paid for, right?
Yep. And my personal belief is SAP should have created it. It should be embedded in. And, I would hazard to say there might be a time where it does get embedded because it's just the right thing to do. And just the other side note, SAP, if you're doing S4, Signavio should be used from a services side now with your S4 implementation to help reduce some of your stuff. I mean, SAP struggles too because people do what they do and what they've known for years. Even I know SAP is struggling to get their services people to use Signavio because they're so used to what they know, right? Good, and I think my watch just told me we're out of time. So thank you for coming out, and I'm seriously mean it. Feel free to reach out at any time, and if you did send me the email to that book, I will send you a copy of the ebook on strategy to reality. Thank you.